hopefully everyone's joining us now. I think we'll start in 30 seconds or so. Sorry about the slight delay. We were just getting the PowerPoint to share and presenter mode. So I think we're there now. So let's kick off. So first of all, welcome to this webinar from SAMPS. It's going to be an interesting discussion today. It's a huge subject. I have run many workshops for our clients around content and context, and really the phrase content is king is thrown around a lot these days, and it surely is king, but context should surely be queen. It's how you use that content and where you use it, and really about getting that customer-centric approach. So my name's Annabel Sedgwick. I run an agency called KDM Communications, and I'm joined today by some great panelists, Sonali from New England Biolabs, Matt from Striven, Dimitri from Microban, and Kylie from Cepheid. They will all introduce themselves, I think, when we get to the panelist discussion. And I've just got a few intro slides before we get there. SAMPS, Sales and Marketing Professionals in Science, you're obviously all familiar with because you've signed up to the webinar. We're a non-for-profit organisation, and it's run entirely by volunteers. We run webinars every month, and we also do 2 in-person conferences each year. So we have one coming up in Berlin on the 4th and 5th of June, just after ESHG, which really delves into this topic in much more detail. We do have a few tickets left, but you do need to be quick. So if this whets your appetite today, then please do follow the link that I'll email out after the webinar and sign up before we do sell out. So really, I want to talk about why should we adopt a customer-centric approach in our marketing and use personas to map content that we're producing in bucket loads across our businesses at every point of the customer journey. I want to start off with a question. Adam is our pollster, and this is around customer centricity. So how many of you feel that your business has a customer-centric approach at the moment? So you've got 3 options: yes, no, or sometimes. And it will be really interesting to see some of the responses. So the HubSpot State of Marketing report has quite an interesting statistic or 2 around this. Within business-to-business marketing, 96% of marketers, so pretty much all of us, recognise that a customer-centric approach is absolutely key. It's all important in their marketing and in their business. And these are great intentions, but actually the same report also states that only 33% of marketers actually feel that their customers have a personalized brand experience. So the intentions are there, but whether they're always actually played out in real life is questionable. So this is really interesting. We've got 47% of you, so more or less half of you feel that your brand does have a customer-centric approach. That's really, really positive. 37, so around a third of you say that sometimes you have a customer-centric approach, and 16% don't. So that's a great starting point, and it's good to see that across these scientific industries, there is a real intention for customer centricity, because it's certainly key to a successful bottom line at the end of the day. If we think of brands like Amazon, perhaps some supermarket brands, travel brands, and how they interact with us, they know so much about us. They know how many children we have, what cars we drive, our food preferences, where we go on holiday, and goodness knows what else that they've managed to surmise. As people marketing often to people in the scientific, clinical, healthcare, medical device sectors, pharma, and so on, it's great to see that there is already that approach out there. Oh, I seem to have frozen. So just before we delve a little deeper into the content and the context, let's think about what a customer-centric approach really means. And it can mean different things. There are several pillars that we need to consider. First of all, you've got to know your customer, and this is what we want to delve into deeper in terms of the questions that we'll be putting to the panel shortly. We need to anticipate their needs. We need to understand what triggers them emotionally, financially, what their ambitions are, where their pain is. We also need to be working in businesses where there is a customer-centric culture from the top down. It's not just about the sales and marketing teams trying to be customer-centric. It needs to be across the entire business and ideally aligned with core brand values. You need to ask for feedback. Go out there, survey your customers each year, and don't just ask for feedback, but act on that feedback and do something about the responses that you get. Having a great onboarding process is really, really important so that people feel really aligned with your brand as they adopt it. And listen, be available, make yourselves available to your customers, make yourselves easy to get in touch with, and meet up in person. You know, in this post-COVID era, people love meeting people, and that's how you can really get a good bond with your customers. And it's not just about bringing the customers through the door, it's about keeping them there, and ideally moving them into the advocacy phase. You want to add value to their brand interactions beyond the sale with educational pieces. It might be that you support them with continuous professional development, user workshops, tips and tricks, application notes, ebooks, white papers, etc. Certainly in terms of content. And it's shown that customer centricity really does boost company performance. It does impact that bottom line. And again, Delve.ai has quite an interesting piece around how profits are generated by companies that have a customer-centric approach, over 60%, so it's a pretty phenomenal amount, and actually how it can reduce marketing costs as well. And in this era of budgets becoming tighter, return on investment being absolutely paramount, if you can shrink your marketing costs a little and be more effective in what you're doing, so much the better, especially when all stakeholders buy in. And we haven't by any stretch got all the stakeholders in this graphic here, but it just gives you some idea of how, even if you're not at the coalface, you can still act with a customer-centric approach in your role. So in terms of personalization, where does this fit in to this conversation? How does really knowing your customer pay dividend? Well, if you know your customers well, you can then personalize the content so it reaches them at exactly the right point in the funnel where they're going to interact with it in the most effective way. So it might be the information gathering phase. It might be about education. It might be the deep dive. But what you want to do is trigger this emotional reaction with your brand when the time is right, wherever they are. And this can be a really big brand differentiator for businesses that do it well. Another interesting statistic here from the State of the Connected Customer, where 84% of business buyers are more likely to buy from people that they feel really understand them. So if any statistic is going to drive an organization towards being a little bit more customer centric, well, I think that's a pretty good reason to do so. On the flip side of that, you've got the same business buyers who say that actually it only really feels as if 57% of people, I flipped that, 43% probably actually have the knowledge. So 57% lack the knowledge of the business. So there's a slight mismatch, and I think that these customer-centric strategies that you can implement will close that gap. So we have a second question here, which will bring us a little bit more to the persona discussion. How many of you do actually use personas in your marketing at the moment? I've given 3 options here, so you don't use them at all, you've done some persona work, but you don't actively use them, it can be a deck that sits in your, on a file somewhere on your server, and they're not used day to day. Or you refer to your persona deck on a very regular basis. Have we got some results in for that yet, Adam? Okay, so only 11% refer to a persona deck on a regular basis. So that's quite staggering, I would say, given the topic of this webinar. Perhaps not all that surprising, though. We've worked with many of our clients on personas, and you've got to get into the habit of using them on a regular basis, and understand the value that it can bring to your brand if you do. 37% of you don't use personas at all. It might be something that you will consider doing after this discussion, particularly if you come to the event in Berlin, which will equip you with a means of gathering persona data, both in person and interrogating it using AI. And half of you have done some persona work, which is great, but you don't actively use it. So think of what you're doing now and how much better you could be doing it in terms of targeting that content more effectively, perhaps, if you were using those personas on a day-to-day basis. Thank you, Adam. Okay. Oh, don't seem to be able to swing to the next slide. Oh, here we are. Okay, so just thinking through the lens of marketing and sales, how do we really get to know our customers and meet their needs? This is a collaboration between sales and marketing. It should never be done in isolation. So often sales and marketing teams are quite siloed. And again, from the HubSpot State of Marketing report, only 35% of marketers say that their sales and marketing teams are well aligned. I think that probably strikes a chord with many people who are here right now. These departments are often quite siloed in terms of location, in terms of budget, in terms of reporting, and really they need to work together to be fully customer centric. Areas where you can work together really effectively are in persona development, customer feedback, understanding the job of the customer. What are they doing functionally? How are they feeling emotionally about their role? Who are they interacting with in the business? Who are the other stakeholders that need to be considered? And what are their unmet needs? Which is where your solutions will fit in. And then there are some things that sales and marketing teams will do in isolation. Sales teams will have really well networked personal relationships. They have the opportunity to listen to the customer more perhaps than the marketing teams do. They have, again, the opportunities to be collaborative with customers on a more one-to-one basis, sort of daily, weekly, monthly. Whereas the marketing teams might then be developing that content to meet the customers and the prospects down the funnel. They'll be tailoring the messaging, hopefully using personas, and then perhaps collecting the feedback, having developed a feedback process along with the sales teams. But it's about working together, sharing insights, good and bad. So let's move on now to the panel discussion. If you could introduce yourselves in the order of this slide, that would be great, everybody. And hopefully there'll be some questions around how you guys are using personas in your businesses, and the deep level of understanding this gives you, so that you can really target that content at your customers and prospects as they move through the funnel and hopefully come out the other side as advocates. So Sonali, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Absolutely. So my name is Sonali Suslak. I lead the marketing operations practice at New England Biolabs. I've been here for 8 years, but I've been in the marketing industry for over 20 now. My background is very much so in experience research and data and strategy. And I'm very excited to be here. And thank you, Annabelle, for those wonderful slides.
Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Wilkinson. I'm a recovering scientist, a marketing strategist and educator. And for the last few years, I've been a bit of an AI experimenter as well.
Hello, everyone. I'm Demetra Bernard. I'm the director for the global marketing team at Microband International. Been with the organization for almost 5 years now and have over 25 years of marketing experience. And have been recently told I'm all about the brand queen within the organization. So appreciate the opportunity to be here as well. Thanks, Annabelle.
And hi everyone, my name's Kylie Charles. I work for Cepheid UK, which is an operating company under the Global Life Sciences umbrella of Danaher. So very pleased to be here. I've worked in medtech diagnostics for about 10 years now. Prior to that, I ran my own agency, which was very influential when it came to helping local companies with online visibility. So persona mapping is something that's quite close to my heart. So looking forward to talking to you about it.
Thank you. Adam, just a housekeeping point. Should I at this point stop sharing my screen so that we can see the panelists and the chat a little bit more clearly? I think perhaps I should. Does that work, everybody?
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Okay, so if I can kick off by asking a question then, could perhaps one of you take the floor and describe how customer centricity is played out in your organization? How do you steer it?
Happy to start here. So I will say, at New England Biolabs, I don't think of customer centricity as a series of things you do or tactics. It's really more of a vibe, a culture. So here, customer centricity is really top down, bottom up. The superstars of the company are tech support and customer support because they're literally solving problems. And I find the way it manifests itself is kind of in these things we do, right? We're always seeking customer feedback. In meetings, the questions are often, revolving around, well, what purpose does this serve to the customer? How does it help the customer? Rather than, okay, how is this affecting revenue? So, I think there's a faith here that if you do right by the customer, everything else will fall into line. And so it comes out in everyday language and everyday culture, as opposed to a series of, things that we're doing, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to share how customer centricity is played out in and across teams?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think working in the area that I do, I'm dealing quite closely with decision makers in the NHS, and I need to understand what it is that they react to, what kind of messaging format turns them on. And it could be something that we're producing that's online digital, it could be written content, it could be meeting them face to face and having a conversation, because they might not be very tech savvy, they might not enjoy using digital forms of media. So we're having to think about those key decision makers that we need to be relating our messages to and what format we can serve it up to them in. So it's quite important that we relate those messages with the influence of our internal stakeholders, because they're out there meeting the customers, and we need to be out there meeting the customers too, because that's when we get those little nuggets of information so we can craft things a little bit better. So it is a continuous learning process, but it makes us better with what we're doing.
And how well do your sales teams appreciate the fact that you're working very closely with them in those customer interactions and trying to get to know the customers perhaps as much as they are?
I think sometimes it can lead to a bit of spirited debate, which I think is good, because if you feel enthusiasm or maybe some pushback on what you're suggesting as a marketing team from the sales team, because they're saying, actually, no, you perhaps don't completely understand the persona here. Why don't we just change this slightly? Or why don't we consider attending this event or putting something like this together? Then that's really good, because it means that you're listening to what it is they know and understand their customers like, and then that can influence what your tactics are. So I think that's a crucial part of what we do.
Yeah. How it would be interesting to know, is there a barrier between sales and marketing teams and anyone else's businesses when it comes to really understanding the customers and working together on that?
I can't say there are barriers, but like Kylie was saying, sometimes there's that debate, and so that ability to have those conversations to come together and really put together something that is really important for the customer, recognizing that sales has a certain expertise, but marketing and brand also have a certain expertise that they bring together. And when you bring those together and you put those pieces, put the heads together, come up with the best content, the best information, the best presentations, then that's where the goodness comes from and you get the best results.
And what kind of content are you developing at those different points in the customer journey, Demetra?
At different points in the customer journey, I mean, you know, we have done some research to find out what sources of information that the key decision makers, you know, what are their preferred sources of information. And so we kind of leverage that. But when we're dealing with sales and they're going in to prospects, customers, trade shows, things along those lines, you know, we develop different types of content based on their needs. And so if they're going in to have a meeting, you know, we take the information that we have about based on our personas and who might be interested in our antimicrobial and odor control technologies, you know, and we, based on it, we tailor it to serve it up with the sales organization to the prospect that might be interested in our technologies. So that's where we really have to get together and understand what's happening with that prospect, with that category or vertical, so that we can put together the best and most robust presentations so that they can understand how our products can actually meet their needs based on the pain points. And how the end consumer is also interested in our technologies being in their products.
That's interesting. Yeah, because you're one step removed perhaps from some of those end users, as many of us are. Can anyone else describe how they're using the customer journey to map out the content to meet their personas as they journey down?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of the clients that I work with is that once you manage to get sales and marketing together in a room or on a call, which is often a big challenge, not because they're siloed, but because everybody's busy and they're just, you know, they're just so many different competing calls on people's times. It's about making sure you understand exactly what questions people are asking at different stages when they, you know, and really making sure that you're understanding those questions, but also what information, in what format do they want the answers? And I think that's really where you can set yourselves apart by making sure that it's not just, hey, we need to answer this question, but it's we need to answer this question in this way. And is that a verbal answer? Is that actually a, you know, if we look at some of the statistics around the sales process getting more and more complicated, Gartner, I think, released an update to some of its research showing that there are maybe up to 17 people now involved in this, you know, in a large decision-making process. So if you can make sure that you've got a piece of, you know, a document or something that is targeted to the procurement manager who you will never meet as part of the process, or something that you can easily equip your champions with, that to provide to the users that you don't, you know, that the sales team don't get to talk to, that can really, really help make sure that you're turning your champions as part of a sales process into, you know, and you're equipping them and actually making them look good because they've got all of this information that they can share. And so you can really help them get the output, you know, the right outcome for them.
Yeah,
that's a good point, actually. Just to add to that, you know, it's not necessarily the finance or procurement team that's going to be that top of the funnel lead for you, but you certainly need to consider them in the whole process as you're mapping the information and content that you're putting together. Because if the inquiry lands on their desk that they're looking at maybe placing that funding with what it is that you've got, they're going to start looking into who you are, how credible you are. And that's when something like for example, a third party piece of content where they're advocating you, that can be really powerful. You know, it taps into that people want what other people have that works well side of things, isn't it? So yeah, it's just thinking about all those different stages that people could be reading and looking into you. But yeah, it's really, really interesting what you said there, Matt.
And of course, to have those customer advocates, you've got to have really happy customers. So you need to have really emotionally bonded with those customers as they've come through to being a customer, and then nurtured them once they've become a customer, so that they're then really happy to give that positive feedback about your brand and their experiences of working with you. So how many of you guys do actually use personas per se, or is it more about just having that customer knowledge and experience that you're playing out day to day?
So we do use personas, but I will say there's been an evolution in kind of what personas are the most valuable for the organization. So I would say, we've always, they used to be a bit more classic, who the user was. Since then, I think, we've taken a broader sort of liberal view of what personas are. We're adding in different data sources all the time. And I would say we've adopted proto-personas, if you will, which is this idea of sort of a narrower scope, but deeper insights, and sort of looking at personas from what is the use case? What is the hat the user is wearing? We have found that a lot of people in the organization respond better to that, right? So, to the point of, or a lot of the responders, we've created personas, but we don't necessarily use it. So part of that is, well, have we created personas that are targeted to the users, right? Just as it's important to get it right from a customer perspective, it's also important to get it right to who are these personas for and what purpose are they going to serve.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Have we got any questions in the chat at this stage? I can't see any questions in the chat, but I don't know if I've got the right thing open. So I just wanted to refer to Adam, who I know is keeping an eye on it. No? Okay. That's
Adam's just said that there aren't any yet, Annabel. So
okay, fine, thank you. No, well, if anyone in the chat has got some questions that they would like to put forward, then please do so. We've got 4. Oh, we've got one here. So thank you. How do you know what content to develop? So how do you, what guides your content?
So for us, there are many things that guide our content, and sometimes it is driven by where we're going and what we're doing. We're going to trade shows, we develop content around that. We look at who's coming in and visiting our website. We use lead forensics to see what's happening there and say, if we see a trend there in terms of the types of companies that are visiting, is there some additional robust content that we need to develop around that and use it in a number of different touch points, whether it's on our website, through LinkedIn, through some of the advertising that we might do. So, and then we develop content, with our partners. We do develop case studies for them to use as they go and do their selling process. So, there are a number of different things that drive the content that we develop.
And how often is that refreshed? Is that how what's the life of a piece of content, would you say, Dimitra, in your world?
Well, I mean, our white papers that we put on our website, they have longevity, so we do appreciate that. And then we do get a lot of downloads on those as well. We've seen that our partners that are looking for those case studies that they can then use, we see a lot of good use that comes out of that as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Has anyone else got any comments around what kind of content, what guides their content development strategy?
I think, I do. And when you're talking about content, and Dimitra was talking there about the metric of downloads, I think actually tracking the activity, tracking what people are doing, what they're responding to, what kind of channels are they comfortable with using, what formats do they relate to, because everything's got to be reflective of people being time poor, so they may be happy just to watch a quick video or read a quick piece of content, especially if it's got a time stamp on it, so they know how much of their time it's going to take up. So I think for us, insight driven decisions are really important, and that means that then we can look at refining our activities, we can look at repeating things that work. So we need to be quite disciplined, I'd say, with actually making the time to look. I know in my career I've had to find the discipline to look at things, because the data's there. It's just up to me what I want to do with it. So I'd say that's probably something that I have to work into my tasks.
Okay. So this isn't a question in the chat, which is quite interesting. How deep do you go with personas at a personal level? So, you might look at key attributes around seniority and buying power and authority. And I have seen some personas where people, put an age range, where do they want to be in 10 years' time? They give them names. How deep do you guys go with that kind of persona development?
Sorry, please go ahead.
No, you go first.
I was going to say, I think it. Well, for me, I think it depends on how are you going to use those personas. What actually is the purpose of the persona in that particular case? So you could very much imagine, you can very much imagine that a young career scientist, a lot changes in their lives in a very short period of time for them, compared with somebody that's a little bit longer in the tooth like myself. And so when if somebody's going to change, you look at where their career aspirations are. So you could imagine a PhD scientist. One might want to go down an academic route, another might want to go into industry. Another might want to leave science altogether. And so if you're able to then look at, well, what are their aspirations, you're able to maybe solve a problem for them. And each of those three, they're going to be quite different persona depending on where they feel they're going to go. For somebody else that's maybe an academic, there may be something that's actually along the lines of, actually, my key things in life are, I want to publish. I need to get recognition. And you might find that there's a more uniformity around that, or there might not be. So for me, it really feels like exactly where are they in their life stages, and how much of a difference does our solution matter to them and them reaching that goal. So I think there's kind of a bit of understanding what the underlying cause of creating the persona is to really understand how deep do you have to go on a personal level.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got another quite interesting question here about how you do the very first steps of crafting personas. So this is something we're going to be going into in a workshop in Berlin, but it would be really interesting to hear from the panel around what were the first steps you took to developing those personas as a business?
Sure. So I would say research is key, right? So generally where we start is, let's look at the queries, right? Let's look at search queries. Let's look at our website data. Let's look at all of our primary data. Let's talk to people within the organization just to get an underlying sense of what's going on. And then I think the key really is talking to your customers. And so that, I think there's some opportunities to go in depth as you like, whether you do ethnography or if you just want to do focus groups or things like that. But I would say the first thing is to develop a baseline understanding, using all the sources you have available. But if you're ever going to do personas, I think, some of that qualitative research really is critical. Like a lot of data can tell you a lot of things, but at the end of the day, that why, that's what you get from literally observing customers, talking to them in the field. Like there's just nothing that replaces that.
Yeah, that primary research is key, isn't it? And I think, there are add-ons to that can be done, but getting out there and talking to people can't be beaten. Did someone else have something to add to that?
Yeah, I think, I don't know how many are familiar with this, but there's something called empathy mapping, where you can really try and put yourselves in the shoes of your ideal personas, and you can try to think along the lines of, what is it that keeps them up at night? What is it they're having to report on? What is it they're having in terms of challenges with their staffing? What is it that we have that helps to provide them solutions for some, if not all of those areas? How can we tailor what we're saying to help resonate with those pain points? So I think sometimes it's going through the process of just answering a series of questions as if you were them and trying to empathize, because not only is that a technique when it comes to the sales process, because you're really starting to understand the customer, but if your tailored marketing can really speak to them, then I think you just get better results. So that's something that I think from an empathic point of view is quite powerful.
Brilliant, thank you. So this is a really interesting question around hyper-targeting. So have any of you been successful in really hyper-targeting a very specific persona type in your CRM so that you can really target that niche perhaps along their sales journey? Particularly interested from the point of view of perhaps being a smaller business as well.
So a lot of it does depend on data, if you've got enough data around that. But one of the things that I've definitely been working on is looking at trying to hyper sort of personalize within an account-based marketing approach. So once you've know the different persona that you're trying to sell to, and you've got that broad picture, and then actually being able to try to map not only What is the primary reason they're going to be looking at? But how can you hyper personalize to create greater connection, whether that's through using tools like Humantic AI to sort of focus the way that you communicate to people, which is sort of a personality AI, through to just trying to understand, hey, what have they published recently? What have they done of late? What have they published on LinkedIn? And really taking that to a point where you can try and scrape some data from whatever public sources and actually use something to create greater connections. So that's something I've definitely been working on, to try to create a more hyper personalized approach based on a route persona, and then sort of, but you can only do that on a smaller proportion of high value clients. Trying to do that en masse is at the moment a task that even with AI I think is a little bit of a challenge.
Perhaps for a smaller business with a potentially smaller database of people, that you'd have quite small groups in that kind of hyper targeting scenario. So that possibly would be really workable. Thank you, Matt. So we have a question here about, how do you promote your content once it's produced? Do you use them? Do you sponsor them through social media? Do you work closely with press and use banners to promote it, that kind of thing? What experiences do you guys have that work well? Certainly, personally, I know gated content works really, really well for many of our clients, where you're able to then download sort of MQL and marketing qualified and sales qualified leads. But it would be really interesting to hear from all of you how you promote your content.
I think it depends on the content, right? So this is where your personas and your journey mapping really comes in handy, because there are certain types of content that are better featured in social media, whereas other types of content you're going to look to, pay to promote it via different channels. So I wouldn't say that there's, kind of a free-for-all. It's more of what kind of content is it, and then what does your research tell you in terms of where is this content gonna resonate best. And it always lives in a certain place, like a website. It's just more of a matter of how are we going to get the word out, and that will really depend on the content, whether we're going to say this is going to be on LinkedIn and ResearchGate versus this is going to be on traditional social media channels, whatever it is.
Do any of you have an example of something that surprised you by working really, really well in terms of hitting a note with your customer base, where they've really engaged with something?
I mean, overall, we see a lot of engagement with our content that we put on LinkedIn. But then, there are times when we do take and promote, and that's typically around the gated content, and we will make that investment. And sometimes it's just trial and error in that aspect as well, because is it gated? Is it gated content, or is it something else that we need to promote? But it's all about looking at the analytics at the end of the day to see what that data looks like to give you that path forward.
And what about different kinds of content? So let's just talk about potentially video content versus infographic versus written. Do any of you have a feel for what's worked really well in certain scenarios at different points in the funnel?
I've seen more of a shift to video content, especially as of lately. So, being able to have but sometimes the challenge is, how do you condense it? And how do you make it brief? Because if not, then we know that we'll lose people. So, but I've seen that shift to video content, and not just putting it out there, but what story are you telling before they go into it as well?
And people can watch them on the move, can't they? They can get their headphones in, they can listen to something. It's a bit like podcasts. I think they're quite popular too. I think that YouTube still is the second largest search engine. So certainly video content is something that we do need to consider as marketers as producing. And it doesn't have to be too onerous. You can produce content and then chop it up into sections that you can push out, but then push out the video content across those different channels, where you may have written content as well. So it's really up to the person that you're wanting to relate the message to, what it is they decide to read or watch. So I think you need to, I think you do really need to have a multi channel approach, because different things turn different groups on. So yeah, it's a hard task for us as marketers, isn't it? We need to make sure that we're doing lots of good things.
And have any of you had experience of testing out content on selected audiences and customer bases and prospects, and then deciding, okay, we're going to do more of this or more of that? Is that something that you've used yourselves, or you've interrogated data for, or anything like that?
I think that goes back to what Demetra had said about the analytics. Like,
Yeah.
we're always looking at analytics for everything, you know, and that kind of, so is it really a test approach? It's more of, let's try it and let's see what the analytics bring back. And then, you know, what works, and what doesn't.
Do more of what works well. Brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
So just on the sort of flip side, have any of you come across any barriers to a kind of this customer-centric approach, really understanding the customer journey in your organizations, or do people really understand the benefits that this approach brings?
I think sometimes barriers when you're dealing with healthcare and medical organizations, you need to understand who's in what position and what the job titles mean. And that's something that I've had to constantly re-educate myself on over the years, because there's different job titles, there's different decision makers, there are different groups and organizations that suddenly have been formed because of governmental decisions, and you need to understand, you know, who's in charge of the funding, who's looking for certain types of information, and make sure that you are preparing the right communication for those groups. So I'd say sometimes that could be a barrier, because you know, what you have used before as a way of approaching can change. So I think you need to always stay aware of what has changed, so that you can make sure that you can reach them.
Absolutely. So we've got an interesting question here, how where we said, you know, a large percentage of people say that they do have personas but don't actually use them. So how would you guys recommend that companies ensure that they actually use this persona data they have regularly and effectively? How can they get people to engage with them?
So,
oh, go on, Matt.
no, please go ahead.
I was just going to, well, speaking from experience, I think, thank you. When you're planning a campaign, I think preparing which personas the campaign content is going to be driven to should be part of your early planning stage. So there's no point putting something together without knowing who you want to be able to push it to. So I think it should form part of a discipline at the beginning of the campaign planning, because then you know who you're shaping that content or designing that tactic for. So that's something that I think is really important to do, because you want to get the best results. You want to, you know, have those metrics and report up from having a successful campaign. So I think it's important to work it into the early planning stages.
No, I absolutely agree. I think one of the things that I've been seeing recently, been doing a lot of playing in AI and being able to build persona within custom GPTs on ChatGPT. So if an organization is able to use AI, I know there's some restrictions around some organizations and what they can and can't do in personas or in AI. But if you can then build that into a more of a dynamic knowledge base where people can actually interact with a persona, rather than having it as a flat document that's beautifully created but not live and kind of gets filed in a drawer. But if you can have it as a sparring partner, if you will, that you can actually ask questions of and check things with, it's not going to be perfect by any means of the imagination. But if you can get to that point where you've really got something that you're thinking is helpful, I think that really, really helps, because we all create personas, we view them, and then I think we forget to look at them. And even when we've got them and they're fairly recent, I do find myself having to say to people, hey, you know, if we check the persona, here's the question that they, you know, question and answer that we agreed that they needed to answer, and sort of making sure that you've got that discipline to create that, I think is really, really important.
And that's actually a particularly valid comment, Matt, because the event in Berlin will be workshopping persona development, where you will be where people will be talking to actual people who will be personas on the day, so they get that primary research interrogation. But then we're going to take those personas and use generative AI to interrogate personas, as Matt's been talking about, and he's going to be leading a workshop around that. So it's going to be really interesting, and a slightly the AI will allow everybody to just elevate what they can get out of that persona development and just make it better. So it's going to be quite an exciting session. But more details on that later. I'll share them with everybody. So let's go on for one final question before we wrap up. How do you measure success internally? Is it automated? So is it possible to measure the success of this customer-centric approach, building out personas, developing content that hits them at these pertinent places? How are you measuring that internally? Could anyone share with us how they're doing that?
Well, everything that we do related to, I'll say, campaigns, because I do have what I call the vital few, which my team would probably call the vital many, of reporting that we do on a monthly basis and looking at all of our different metrics. But if I think about just some email campaigns, you know, and you know, our CRM system, and using Pardot and really being able to track, you know, through the journey once someone becomes a qualified lead. But we are also able to track the success of our campaigns, you know, delivery, open rate, clicks, things along those lines. And when you have, you know, 4 to 6 emails within your campaigns, you get an idea of what content is more meaningful to them. And over time, we're able to evolve our messages. The other thing that helps us is you know, your personas come to life when you have partners that you're selling to, and you get an idea of what their needs are and what they're looking for. And you can take the experience that you have with them and know that, you know, some of these other these prospects may be sitting in the same boat, and it allows you to kind of think about and tailor your message based on the conversations that you might have had with them.
Great, thank you. And I think we've got a question here around, do you need to develop personas on a regular basis as the company grows and the market changes? You know, are these personas dynamic? Are they things that you interact with on a regular basis and review and update and expand upon?
Yes, of course. So
Yes.
I would say personas, in some ways, like the foundations of them might be classic, but there's always going to be drift over time. And the other thing I'll say is, you know, you're going to have to iterate on the personas, but what's more important is to continually iterate on the journeys that are associated with those personas, because with AI data, you know, even sort of the remnants of COVID, there's so many things that have changed the customer journey so dramatically and so quickly that I think, you know, it's impossible to keep the shelf life of journeys is very limited right now. You know, I think personas, you could probably keep them for a while, like people's motivations, goals, like those things ultimately are stable aspects of their personality. But, you know, in terms of their journeys, I've just never seen so much dramatic shifting in such a short period of time as much as we have in the last 5 to 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also along with that, it's about refreshing content, not necessarily just for those customers on the journeys, but you refresh content for so many other reasons as well, in terms of SEO and all this kind of thing. So brilliant. Are there any other comments from anybody that you'd like to make before we wrap up? I think we're kind of coming towards the end now. So I'll go back to the slideshow. Bear with me one sec. I'll share my screen again. And there we are. Can everybody see that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
That's
fantastic.
perfect.
So I just wanted to summarize, firstly, by extending my thanks to all the panelists, to Matt, Sonali, Dimitri, and Kylie, but also to think about the 5 W's. You know, curiosity is absolutely the key when it comes to persona development, and really understanding how, you know, what kind of content you need to develop to map through that customer journey. So, you know, who are those customers? Target the right group of customer prospects. So those are the personas that you need to develop. And some organizations will have 15, others might have a handful, they might have 5 or 6. It will depend purely, and you might have different persona decks for the different services and products that you will have different personas for the different services and products that you sell. So what use the right content relevant to the target, as well as being, you know, genuinely useful to them, educational, and tips and tricks, career, you know, supporting their career development and so on. Where, so reach those people through the right sources and channels in the right formats. So that's all about the context. And when, the right content at the right time in their customer journey. And why should you do all this? Well, because you know your personas well, you know that you're addressing their pain. And I think, Kylie, what you said about the empathy mapping is really key there. You know, what keeps them awake at night? I love that thought. Because that's really going to result in gaining customers and keeping customers close to you. And I just wanted to finish off here with a bit of a pun. Everybody likes fluffy animals. So we've got content, we've got the king, we've got context, the queen. So I would urge everybody to give your marketing strategy the royal treatment. It will be the crown and glory of you and your team. So what next? So as we've given you, as I said earlier, this webinar has been designed to be a little bit of a taster of what's to come in Berlin on the 4th and 5th of June, directly after ESHG. As I said, I think there are still some tickets available, so do please snap them up before they do all go, because there are limits to the numbers. But really, it's all about honing in our persona development skills and really creating a culture of customer centricity within your organization, and using those personas to better map your interactions with your customers and develop the right kind of content for them along their journey. So I think perhaps many of you would find that really interesting, really helpful. And of course, it's a great opportunity to network with lots of colleagues from across the different scientific industries as well. So thank you all for coming today. Again, thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Adam, behind the scenes, coordinating Zoom for us all. And see you in Berlin.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.